The war exposing the decline of American empire. How can Iran be winning against Israel and the United States, two of the most heavily armed military powers on Earth? How can a sanctioned state under siege for decades still stand tall while Washington burns billions, Tel Aviv burns interceptors, oil markets panic, and the entire world begins asking one dangerous question? What if the empire is still powerful, but no longer in control? Because this war is exposing a truth the West never likes to admit. The side with the most advanced weapons does not automatically win. In modern warfare, the side with the biggest bombs can still lose the deeper strategic battle, especially when the other side is not fighting for conquest, but for survival, sovereignty, and self-defense. And that is exactly how Iran is framing this war. From Tehran's perspective, this is not a war of empire. This is not a war of occupation. This is not a war of expansion. This is a war built on one message. You can bomb us. You can sanction us. You can isolate us. But you cannot force us to kneel. And right now, whether one likes it or not, Iran is making that message visible to the entire world. Let's dive deep. This is not a normal war. Yes, Israel and the United States dominate the skies. Yes, they have better jets, deeper intelligence networks, stronger defenses, and far larger military budgets. But Iran is not trying to defeat them on their battlefield. Iran is dragging them onto its battlefield. A war of attrition, a war of cost, a war of geography, a war of escalation control, a war of political exhaustion. That is not weakness. That is disciplined asymmetric warfare. Every low-cost Iranian drone, every missile volley, every maritime disruption, every regional pressure point, all of it is designed to force the enemy to spend millions to stop what costs. Iran a fraction of that. This war is no longer just a military conflict. It is an economic earthquake, and some of the biggest shockwaves are hitting America's own allies. Take the United Arab Emirates. The UAE's highly globalized economy, built on tourism, aviation, real estate, logistics, and finance, has been hammered. More than $120 billion wiped from Dubai and Abu Dhabi stock exchanges in just a month. Over 18,400 flights canceled. Missile and drone debris damaging Dubai International Airport, Palm Jumeirah, Burj Al Arab, and Fujairah's oil zone. The Dubai index fell 16% since the war began on February 28, 2026. Now look at Qatar. Iranian strikes have triggered severe LNG disruption. Qatar Energy halted production at key facilities. Shell declared force majeure on some Qatari cargoes. Global gas markets are being shaken. Qatar's export machine, a major supplier for the world, is under pressure. Other Gulf states are also exposed. Even when missiles are intercepted, the economic effect is brutal. Insurance costs rise. Investors panic. Flights reroute. Shipping slows. Capital flees risk. Saudi Arabia is more complicated. Higher oil prices help parts of the market. But a wider regional war brings higher security costs, shipping risks, and direct threats to energy infrastructure. Even countries benefiting from expensive oil pay a hidden war tax. Brent crude is up nearly 60% since the start. While the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of global oil flows, remains under severe pressure. Then there is Israel. Official spin may project resilience, but the economic strain is real. Growth forecasts have dropped to 3.3%. A 699 billion shekel, 221 billion, defense-heavy. Budget highlights the cost of war. And finally, the United States. Markets are volatile. S&P 500 and NASDAQ have slid. Higher fuel prices, shipping disruptions, and military deployment costs hit Washington. Every Iranian launch is not just a strike. It is a financial ambush. It drains stockpiles. It drains budgets. It drains logistics. And above all, it drains political patience. America can tolerate a short war. It struggles with a long, expensive war with no clean victory. That is Iran's strategy. If it cannot outgun the U.S. and Israel, it can make the entire regional economic order bleed. And that is how empires bleed. This war is also exposing the decay of American empire. For decades, U.S. global power rested on three pillars: military supremacy, control of energy routes and sea lanes, and the petrodollar system. That third pillar is critical. For generations, global oil was overwhelmingly priced and traded in dollars under a Gulf security architecture backed by Washington. That meant the world needed dollars to buy energy. That meant Gulf wealth recycled into U.S. assets. That meant America could run massive deficits, finance endless wars, and project power with a monetary privilege no empire in history had ever enjoyed. But now the contradiction is exploding. America can still destroy, but it increasingly struggles to stabilize. It can still punish, but it increasingly struggles to control outcomes. It can still launch wars, but it increasingly struggles to end them on its own terms. That is the signature of imperial decline. Not immediate collapse. Decay. Not the end in one day. Erosion in real time. And this war is making that erosion visible. Hormuz, Iran's hand on the throat of the system. Iran does not need to defeat the U.S. Navy globally. It only needs to expose the vulnerability of the artery that feeds the global order. The Strait of Hormuz. This is one of the most important energy choke points on Earth. A massive share of global oil and LNG passes through it. That means when Iran pressures Hormuz, it is not merely threatening ships. It is squeezing the bloodstream of the global energy system. And that changes everything. Because this war is not only about missiles hitting targets. It is also about markets, insurance rates, shipping risks, investor panic, supply shocks, and the political cost of instability. So when oil surges, when shipping hesitates, when traders panic, when Gulf monarchies begin calculating risk, Iran has already landed a strategic blow. Not because it conquered territory, but because it forced the world to feel the cost of trying to break it. That is why this is not just a battlefield. This is economic warfare against the architecture of U.S. power. The petrodollar is not dead, but it is bleeding. Now let's be precise. The dollar is not finished. It remains the dominant reserve currency. It remains the central pillar of global trade and finance. So no, the petrodollar did not collapse overnight. But empires do not collapse in one dramatic moment. They weaken in layers. First, trust erodes. Then alternatives grow. Then coercion becomes more expensive. Then every war produces less obedience and more resistance. That is what we are watching. If Gulf elites begin to doubt that America can truly protect them without dragging them into catastrophe, then the old bargain weakens. Oil for dollars, dollars for security, security for obedience. That formula is under stress, and Iran is one of the forces exposing that stress. The empire can still flex its muscles, but every time it does, more of the world asks, at what cost? For whose benefit? And for how much longer? That is how monetary power begins to crack. Not with a sudden collapse, but with a slow loss of confidence. 5. BRICS, de-dollarization, and the multipolar turn. This is where BRICS becomes central, not because BRICS has already replaced the dollar. It has not. But because BRICS symbolizes something much bigger, the refusal of the global south to accept permanent Western financial tutelage. China buys more Gulf oil. Russia trades outside Western systems. India experiments with alternative settlement channels. Iran and others push for trade mechanisms less vulnerable to U.S. sanctions. So when Iran resists militarily, it is also reinforcing a political message. The world does not have to remain permanently trapped inside a U.S. policed order. That is why this war matters far beyond missiles. It is a test of whether the so-called rules-based international order still commands real legitimacy. And across much of the global south, that phrase now sounds less like law and more like selective enforcement. Rules for rivals, exceptions for allies, sanctions for enemies, impunity for partners. That is not universal order. That is hierarchy dressed up as law. And when law is applied selectively, it stops functioning as law. It starts functioning as power. That is why so many people across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East are watching this war, not as a local conflict, but as a global referendum on Western hypocrisy. How the hidden regional agenda many people suspect. Now here is the deeper and more controversial layer. Many across the region believe this war is not only about Iran. They believe it is also about managing the Middle East through permanent fragmentation, a classic imperial formula. Divide Muslim powers, turn supposed enemies against each other, keep the region too fractured to unite, and preserve outside control. In that reading, one long-term strategic objective has always been to prevent a durable political alignment between Iran, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, and the wider Arab and Islamic world. Because a truly coordinated regional bloc would dramatically reduce outside leverage, and that is why the Iran-Saudi thaw mattered so much. if the region moves away from permanent Sunni-Shia polarization, if Persian-Arab hostility is reduced, if strategic rivals begin talking instead of bleeding, then the old divide-and-rule architecture starts to weaken. That does not prove a secret master plan, but it explains why so many people suspect the war is not just military. It is also civilizational manipulation. And here is the irony. The more the region understands that total war could destroy everyone, the less willing major regional states become to openly cheer Iran's collapse. Because many know a broken Iran would not bring peace. It could bring fire from the Gulf to the Levant, and nobody controls that fire once it spreads. 7. The third temple, messianic politics, and why this fear matters. Now let's address the most sensitive issue. There are ideological and religious nationalist currents inside parts of Israel, especially among some far-right settler and messianic movements that openly speak about Temple Mount, the displacement of current Islamic structures, or the eventual construction of a third temple. That is real as an ideological current, but it is crucial to be accurate. It is not established fact that this war was launched as a proven official state plan to build the third temple for the coming Messiah. That claim is widely discussed, widely feared, widely circulated across the Muslim world, but it remains a belief, suspicion, or ideological interpretation, not a verified official war objective. Still, that does not make it irrelevant, because perception itself is power. If millions across the region believe extremist, religious nationalist currents are gaining strength inside Israel, if they believe permanent war around Jerusalem could empower those currents, if they believe holy sites are being drawn into an apocalyptic political imagination, then the conflict stops looking like a simple military confrontation. It starts looking like a civilizational alarm bell, and that fear itself shapes politics. That fear mobilizes populations. That fear hardens resistance. That fear strengthens. Iran's claim that this is not only about strategy, but about dignity, sacred space, and survival. Why Iran looks like the winner. So let's ask the real question. Is Iran stronger than Israel and the United States in conventional military power? No, not in jets, not in technology, not in intelligence, not in global force projection. But is Iran winning the deeper strategic contest? By surviving attack, by refusing submission, by raising the cost of war, by threatening energy chokepoints, by shaking oil markets, by exposing the fragility of the petrodollar, by accelerating de-dollarization debates, by undermining faith in the U.S.-led order, by turning empire's strength into visible overreach. Yes, absolutely. Because in the 21st century, victory is no longer only about who can bomb harder. It is about who can endure longer, bleed the empire deeper, and survive long enough to make power itself look powerless. That is the real battlefield. And right now, that is exactly why Iran looks like it is winning. Not because Iran is richer, not because Iran is stronger, not because Iran controls the skies, but because the empire that promised order now spreads chaos, the alliance that promised security now produces panic, and the state they tried to break is still standing. And sometimes in history, the side that survives the empire's full weight becomes the side that exposes the empire's decline. This is no longer just Iran versus Israel. This is no longer just Iran versus America. This is the old unipolar order being tested by a world that is no longer willing to kneel. And if that order cannot crush resistance quickly, cannot stabilize what it bombs, cannot protect what it claims to control, and cannot stop the global south from imagining alternatives, then this war may be remembered not as the moment Iran was destroyed, but as the moment the empire was exposed.